I had been awake for most of the night, sitting in the dark at the edge of my bunk, staring at the single round porthole window that looked out into space. The stars were still there, quiet, perfectly still. Nothing about them told you that 600 enemy warships were now inside our solar system, moving toward Earth like a slow, patient tide. My name is Yale Osai. I am a commander in what the world believes is humanity's last line of defense. A half-broken lunar station with 42 underpowered cannons and a crew of 300 people who look, to any outside observer, like a group of frightened soldiers waiting for an order to surrender. That is exactly what we need the Vorkai to believe. I pulled on my uniform in the dark, not bothering with the lights. After 18 months of this, my hands knew where every button was. I walked down the corridor to the observation deck and stood at the wide curved window that gave the best view in the whole station. Below me, the Earth turned slowly, blue and white and quiet. From here you could not see the cities. You could not see the screens showing the Vorkai's broadcast, the one they had sent to every device on the planet 4 days ago. You could not see the faces of people watching it. But I had already seen those faces. I had watched the broadcast from this same room the morning it arrived. The Vorkai do not waste words. Their message was 64 seconds long. It opened with a list: 4 planets, 4 names, each one followed by the same phrase: pacified and absorbed. It was how they described the end of a civilization. Not destroyed, not gone, absorbed. As if an entire species of people was simply a substance to be processed and folded into their empire. Then came the offer. Humanity had 72 hours to submit a formal declaration of surrender, broadcast on all frequencies, signed by every world government. In exchange, a portion of the human population would be permitted to survive, relocate to 2 designated moons, and serve the empire in administrative roles. They used the word permitted the way someone might use it when speaking to a pet. If no surrender came, the process of pacification would begin. They had done this 4 times before. 4 planets, 4 civilizations. Not one of them had found a way to fight back. The Vorkai were not offering a choice, they were offering a formality, a bureaucratic step before the inevitable. That morning, I stood in this same spot and watched Earth's leaders argue on a split-screen feed. Some of them were crying. Some were very still, the way people go still when they are past fear and into something that has no name. A few were already drafting the surrender text, their voices low and careful, choosing words that might make the Vorkai slightly more lenient. I watched all of it and I said nothing. Because I knew something none of them knew. Something almost no one alive on Earth knew. A secret that had been kept for 9 years at a cost I do not have enough words to describe. My communicator buzzed once against my wrist. I looked down at the screen. 2 words. No sender name, no coordinates, just the message, clean and plain, the way it had always come for 18 months whenever I needed steadying. Hold position. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. I held the communicator against my chest for a moment. Outside the window, the Earth kept turning. Somewhere in the dark behind it, hidden so completely that not even the most sensitive Vorkai instruments had ever picked up a trace, something enormous was waiting. Let me tell you how this started. 9 years ago, I was a junior officer on a deep-range exploration vessel. We were 400 million kilometers past Neptune, cataloging debris fields, when our long-range sensors picked up something strange. Not a ship, not a signal, something older. A field of wreckage drifting in a slow spiral, pieces of metal and polymer and material we had no name for, spread across a volume of space roughly the size of a small moon. It took us 6 hours to identify what we were looking at. It was a graveyard. Someone had fought a battle here a long time ago. The wreckage was centuries old, maybe more. 2 different types of ships, the fragments were distinct in composition, clearly from different builders. One type we had seen before in intelligence files. Vorkai design, unmistakable. The angular geometry, the triple-layered hull construction. We had studied their ships in theory for decades, ever since their empire appeared at the edges of our mapped space. The other type we had never seen. Whoever built those ships had fought the Volcae, and from what our analysis showed, they had fought them to a standstill, maybe even pushed them back. The Volcae wreckage outnumbered the other by a ratio of roughly 3-1. Someone somewhere had made the Volcae bleed. My captain sent a compressed report back to Earth that same day. I did not know it then, but that report landed on the desk of a small, quiet woman named Admiral Petrosau, who was then the head of a department so classified it had no official name. She read the report once, set it down, and made 3 calls. Those 3 calls became the program. I was recruited 8 months later, not because of any special skill, though they told me I had several. I was recruited because of a specific quality that the program needed in certain visible roles, what my evaluator described as a convincing capacity for helplessness. She did not mean it as an insult. She explained it carefully. The program needed people in public-facing military positions who could perform defeat, who could look afraid on broadcasts without overacting, who could stand in front of cameras and seem like exactly what the Volcae expected humanity to be: small, disorganized, and running out of options. I was, apparently, very good at looking like I was running out of options. What I was actually doing for 18 months was feeding the Volcae a picture. Every broadcast I participated in, every scrambled emergency channel they were definitely intercepting, every piece of manufactured intelligence we allowed to leak, it all pointed to the same story. Humanity was unprepared. Humanity was frightened. Humanity's military was fragmented, underfunded, and dependent on outdated technology. Every single word of it was a lie. I had never been inside Titan Station. I had never seen what was built there. My security clearance only permitted me to know that it existed and that it was large. The 2 words on my communicator hold position came from someone at the center of it, someone who watched my transmissions and decided when to remind me that I was not alone. Standing at the observation window, watching the Earth turn below me, I thought about the 72-hour clock that was now running. The Volcae's 600 ships were moving in a formation they called a glory column, a long, dense parade line designed to be visible, designed to be terrifying. They wanted every human sensor, every satellite camera, every frightened face pressed to a telescope to see them coming. They wanted the weight of their arrival to do half the work before a single weapon fired. They were very good at this. They had done it before. But they had never done it here. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass of the observation window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, past the visible dark, past every sensor the Volcae had positioned in this system, 4,100 human warships were holding perfectly still in the silence. They had been still for a long time, patient in a way that I sometimes struggled to understand because I was out here in the light, performing surrender, and they were in the dark, holding. A junior officer appeared at the door of the observation deck. Young, maybe 23. His name was Corporal Owen Clark, and he had been on the station for 11 months. He did not know about Titan Station. He believed completely and sincerely that this station was humanity's real last defense. I could see it in the way he carried himself, the careful, compressed tension of a person who has accepted that they will probably not survive what is coming, and has decided to be steady about it anyway. He was braver than he knew. He handed me a data pad without a word. I looked at the screen. The Earth governments had finalized the draft surrender text. They were requesting my review as the senior military officer on the lunar station before transmission. I read it carefully. It was well written. It was humble in all the right places. It would have been entirely convincing to anyone who did not know the truth. I approved it. Owen took the pad back and left. I heard his footsteps fade down the corridor, and then there was no sound at all except the low steady hum of the station's ventilation system. I thought about my daughter. Her name was Adiz. She was 11 years old and she lived with my sister in Accra. She thought I was stationed on the moon because I was important. She sent me drawings sometimes, through the official mail channel. The last one had been a picture of a rocket ship with my name on the side, flying past a large yellow star. I had not been able to tell her anything real for 18 months. I would not be able to tell her anything for a while longer still. I stood at the window until the shift bell rang. Then I straightened my uniform, put my hands at my sides, and walked back down the corridor to do what I had been doing for a year and a half. I performed surrender. And somewhere in the deep silence past Saturn, 4,100 ships waited without moving, without transmitting, without making a single sound that any Voakai instrument could catch. The clock was running. And we were ready. I was called into the command room at 400 station time, 3 hours after I had finally managed to sleep. The call came as a single short pulse on my emergency band, the kind that does not wait for you to decide whether you want to answer it. I was on my feet and moving before I was fully awake, pulling my jacket on as I walked. The command room was small. It always felt smaller when it was full of people trying to look calm. Lieutenant Nora Webb was at the communications board, her headset on, her eyes fixed on something on her screen that she clearly did not want to be looking at. Sergeant Dale Finch was standing by the sensor array with his arms folded, doing the thing he did when he was working through a problem, rolling his lower lip slightly inward, staring without blinking. At the center table, Chief Officer Raymond Cole had 3 separate data feeds running simultaneously, and he was switching between them with the practiced speed of someone who has done it too many times. They all looked up when I walked in. Raymond spoke first. "They've adjusted their formation," he said. He turned one of the screens toward me. The Voakai column had tightened. The 600 ships were now grouped more densely in the center, with a ring of outer vessels spaced in a pattern that any tactical eye would recognize as an encirclement posture. They were not just approaching. They were already beginning to wrap. "How long?" I asked. "At current speed, they enter high orbit in 19 hours, Nora said. She did not look up from her screen. 19 hours. Inside my chest, something shifted very quietly. Not fear exactly. Something more like the sensation of a door you have been leaning against for a long time finally beginning to open. I sat down at the table and looked at the feeds. On the secondary screen, I could see the public broadcast channels. Every major network on Earth was running continuous coverage. Most of it was analysts talking over sensor images of the approaching ships. A few channels were showing the surrender document, the one I had approved, the one that was now being prepared for transmission. Somewhere in an office I would never see, a communications officer was getting ready to send a message into space that said, in the formal language of capitulation, that humanity accepted the terms. I had to make sure I looked as though I believed it was over. That was the job. I pulled up my personal log and began recording the kind of entry a defeated officer records, practical, subdued, the voice of someone organizing their thoughts before an end. I noted the position of the enemy fleet. I noted the hours remaining. I noted the status of our station systems, which were perfectly operational, though we had spent considerable effort making certain that any Voakai intercept would read them as partially degraded. I was a very good liar. I had never been proud of it before this assignment. My communicator buzzed. Not 2 words this time, a set of coordinates and a single letter, Q. I stared at it for 3 seconds. Then I stood, told Raymond I needed to conduct a systems check on the lower relay array, and walked out of the command room. The Quantum Link terminal was in a maintenance shaft on level 4, behind a panel that looked like a standard power relay casing. It had been installed before I arrived on the station by a technician who had transferred out 6 weeks later. To anyone who checked, and people did check, occasionally, because Volkai intelligence was not careless. It looked like a backup resonance coupler. It was not. It was a direct line to Titan Station. I closed the panel behind me, sat down in the narrow space, and activated the terminal. The screen lit up, and for the first time in 4 months, I did not get a text message. I got a face. She was older than I expected, though I had been told she was older. Admiral Petra Sau looked like someone who had spent years in rooms where everything was complicated and none of it could be discussed. Her hair was gray and cut short. She had the kind of stillness that is not calm but is something past calm, a stillness that comes from having made very large decisions and then living with them. "Commander Osai," she said. Her voice was clear even through the compressed link. "How are you holding up?" "I'm operational," I said. She gave me a brief look that suggested she had heard that answer before and found it only partly useful. "Good. I'm going to tell you something now that I need you to absorb without reacting visibly. You are likely being passively observed on their optical sensors. Keep your face even." "Understood." She paused for exactly 1 second. "We are moving to Readiness Stage 4. All 4,100 ships are now fully armed and positioned. The formation is complete. We have been at holding depth for 62 hours with 0 signal leakage detected." I kept my face still. I want to explain what that number meant to me. 4,100 ships. I had known the number in the abstract. It was part of the briefing I had received 18 months ago, a number in a document that I had read in a room that was then immediately locked. But hearing it spoken aloud, in a quiet voice, in a maintenance shaft on a lunar station, while 600 enemy ships moved toward Earth, the number became real in a way it had never quite been before. We outnumbered them, not slightly, not narrowly. We outnumbered them by nearly 7 to 1. "I want to tell you how we got here," Petra said, "because you have been carrying this from the outside, and you deserve to know what you've been protecting." She turned her screen slightly, and a slow image feed began to accompany her words. Long corridors carved from stone, lit by rows of overhead lights, full of ships. Full of ships. The program had begun 9 years ago in a cavern inside Titan that no satellite had imaged and no probe had been permitted to approach. It had started with 17 engineers, a fabrication algorithm, and a set of designs based on the wreckage I had helped find in the debris field past Neptune. Those designs had been studied, reverse-engineered, improved, and made human. The ships that came from that process were not copies of the ancient vessels we found. They were something new. Something built by a species that had spent its entire history solving problems it was not supposed to be able to solve. The power source came first. A young engineer from Lagos named Callum Briggs had spent 14 months working on the phase cloak energy problem. Specifically, the fact that cloaking a ship of significant size required more power than any known human reactor could provide without producing a heat signature the Volkai's thermal sensors would catch. Callum solved it when he was 19 years old, in the middle of the night, and reportedly sat very still for 10 minutes before writing anything down. His solution reduced the power requirement by 63% and produced a heat signature indistinguishable from background stellar radiation. He had never left Titan Station. No one inside the program had once they were in. The secrecy had to be complete. It had to be the kind of secrecy that had no gaps, because one gap, one signal, one intercepted transmission, and everything ended. The ships were built in sections. Each section was constructed in a different part of the cavern, by crews who knew only their section. Final assembly happened in the deepest part of the facility, below even the main construction level, in a chamber so large that the engineers who first entered it said it felt like standing inside a small city. The materials came from the asteroid mining operations that had been running in the outer system for 2 decades. The Volkai had monitored those operations for years. They saw exactly what they expected to see: commercial extraction. Industrial waste, unremarkable tonnage moving through well-mapped corridors. They had no reason to look more carefully. They had never needed to look more carefully before. That was the piece that mattered most. Not the ships, not the cloak, not the weapons which were formidable. The piece that mattered most was that the Volcae had never imagined something like this was possible, and so they had never looked for it. Arrogance is not stupidity, but it does the same damage. The tactical formation was designed by a former cargo pilot named Gwen Farley, Petra continued. The image feed showed a diagram, a geometric arrangement of ships that looked, from certain angles, like the inside of a shell. She studied how starlings move in large groups, the way 10,000 birds can shift direction as one body instantly without a central command signal. She adapted that principle for fleet combat. Our ships are linked in a distributed response network. When the order comes, they will all move as one. I thought about Gwen Farley, a cargo pilot, sitting somewhere inside a moon, watching birds on whatever small screen she had access to, and turning that image into something that could surround 600 warships. I thought about Callum Briggs, 19 years old, solving the equation that made all of it possible. I thought about every person inside that station who had lived in the dark for years, away from their families, away from sunlight, away from the world they were protecting, because the protection required them to disappear. The families, I said, my voice was steady. I had practiced keeping it steady. Petra did not look away. We're told what they could be told, she said quietly, which was very little, that their family member was on a classified posting, that they were safe, that they could not be contacted. My daughter thinks I'm stationed here for career reasons. I know. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable, but was very full. After this is over, Petra said, you will be able to tell her everything. I nodded once. One more thing, Petra said. The surrender document. We need it transmitted in the next 6 hours. It needs to land with the Volcae Fleet Command before they adjust their formation any further. If they spread their ships too wide before we uncloak, the pocket closes less cleanly. Understood. I'll authorize the transmission at 900. Good, she leaned slightly forward. Yale, you have done this perfectly, 18 months and not a single break. I want you to know that. I looked at her face on the screen. She was not a warm person by nature, I could tell that clearly. She was precise and contained and had probably not said the word perfectly to very many people in her career. I believed her. Thank you, Admiral. The screen went dark. I sat in the maintenance shaft for another 2 minutes, not moving. Then I stood, smoothed my uniform and walked back up to the command room. At 900, I authorized the surrender transmission. The Volcae fleet received it 40 minutes later. Their acknowledgement came back within the hour, a cold, brief confirmation in their language, which our translation systems rendered as submission noted. Compliance will be verified upon arrival. Nora read it aloud to the room. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Sergeant Finch uncrossed his arms and said, very quietly, they have no idea. I looked at him. He looked back at me. He was not supposed to know anything. He was not part of the program. He had been on this station for 16 months, and he had watched me run the performance for most of that time, and now he was looking at me with an expression that I had not seen on his face before. Not fear, not defeat. Something else, something quieter. I said nothing. I kept my face exactly as it needed to be. But I thought, no, they have no idea at all. The surrender document was in space. It was moving at the speed of light towards 600 ships that had already begun their final approach to Earth, and there was no taking it back. That was fine. We did not want to take it back. Every word of it had been written to be read by the Volcae and to make them comfortable, to let them settle into the certainty that this was proceeding exactly as it always had. I stood on the observation deck again, later that evening, and watched the sensor feed that showed the enemy formation. They had responded to our transmission by slowing slightly, not a lot, but enough to be visible on the display. They were no longer in a rush. Why would they be? The prey had announced itself. The outcome was settled. Their admiral was probably reviewing arrival logistics, arranging the order of his ships for the visual impact of entering orbit in proper formation. I had been told the Volcae placed great value on the visual, on ceremony, on the image of power, not merely its presence. They wanted their conquests to look a certain way, orderly, inevitable, beautiful in their understanding of the word. That was the second thing. They did not know about what was waiting for them. When the human fleet uncloaked, it would not look like a defensive force scrambling to respond. It would look like something that had been placed with enormous deliberateness, because it had been, every ship in position, every angle calculated. The geometry of it from the outside would be unmistakable. It would not look desperate. It would not look accidental. It would look like a message. I was not told everything about the 48 hours leading up to the uncloak. There were things happening at Titan Station that I did not have clearance for and had not asked about. What I knew was the timeline, the position of our fleet, and the moment at which the order would come. Everything else was the province of people far deeper inside this than I was. What I could do, what I was doing every hour of every day, was hold the surface. The surface was the station. The surface was my face in every broadcast. The surface was the trembling, fractured image of a species running out of time. It had to be convincing right up until it was over. Owen Clark found me on the observation deck that evening. He came in quietly, carrying 2 cups of something hot, and stood beside me at the window without asking for permission to be there. I did not ask him to leave. He handed me one of the cups. It was tea. It was not very good tea, the way most things on the station were not very good functional, approximating what the real thing felt like, but produced from packets that had been sitting in a supply locker for longer than was ideal. I drank it anyway. 12 hours, Owen said, looking at the sensor feed on the side screen. About that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you think there's anything on the other side of this? I mean after." I looked at him. He was very young. His face in the dim light of the observation deck had that quality that very young faces have, the quality of not yet being settled, of still being in the process of becoming whatever it was going to become. I thought about what I could say. I thought about what was true. "Yes," I said, "I think there's quite a lot on the other side of this." He nodded slowly, as if he was filing it away rather than immediately accepting it. A careful mind. I liked that about him. "I'm not afraid," he said. I could tell he was partially checking whether it was true as he said it. "I know," I said, "that's obvious." He looked at me, slightly surprised. Then something in his face loosened a little. He drank his tea. We stood there for a while, watching the stars. The Volcae ships were not visible to the naked eye, they were still too far out, but the sensor feed showed them clearly. A dense moving shape, 600 points of light drawn together in a column, moving steadily toward us. Behind them, invisible to every instrument they had, 4,100 other lights were holding perfectly still. I had been told early in the program that the hardest part of the operation would not be the engineering. It would not be the secrecy, or the construction, or the positioning of the fleet. The hardest part, the program's architects believed, would be the waiting. Specifically, the waiting of the people who knew. They were right. There is a particular quality to knowing something enormous and being required to behave as if you do not know it. I am not describing the difficulty of lying. Lying is a skill and skills can be practiced. I am describing something more internal, the continuous tension of holding 2 realities in your body at the same time. The reality of what is visible and the reality of what is not. The reality of the station and its 42 cannons, and the reality of the 4,100 ships behind the dark. I had been holding both of those realities for 18 months. My communicator buzzed. I glanced at it, one word this time. "Ready." I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then I opened them and looked out at the stars and thought about my daughter's drawing, the rocket with my name on the side, flying past a yellow star. I thought about what I would tell her afterward. I thought about Callum Briggs and his equation, about Gwen Farley and her birds. I thought about every person inside Titan Station who had given years of their life to the dark, and who were now sitting at their posts, watching their screens, waiting for the single command that would end 9 years of silence. 12 hours became 10. 10 became 6. I ate a meal I did not taste. I recorded another log entry, still performing, still contained, still the defeated officer waiting for the end. I reviewed the station's systems. I briefed Owen and the rest of the crew on evacuation protocols, which was what a commander in my position was supposed to do at this stage, and which also happened to be useful to know regardless. At 2 hours out, the Volkai Admiral sent a secondary communication. It was addressed specifically to the lunar station, to me, by designation. It said that upon arrival, a Volkai administrative vessel would dock with our station and collect the formal signatures of military capitulation. It asked me to have the station's senior officers assembled in the docking bay. The tone of it was not aggressive. That almost made it worse. It was simply routine, efficient, the kind of message you send when the outcome has never been in question. I replied, formally and in the correct format, that I would comply. I set down the communicator and stood very still in the center of my quarters for about 30 seconds. Then I washed my face, straightened my uniform, and walked to the command room. The final 2 hours moved differently from all the hours before them. They moved the way time moves when you are approaching something that cannot be undone, not faster, not slower, but with a quality of weight that makes each minute feel substantial, like something you could hold in your hand. The crew was quiet. They were all doing their jobs with the careful precision of people who have decided to be professional about whatever comes next. I was proud of them. I was proud of them in a way I could not express, because expressing it would have required explaining things I was not permitted to explain. At 30 minutes out, the Volkai formation came within visual range. Not the naked eye, but the station's enhanced optical system put them on the main screen, and for the first time, we were looking at them not as sensor points but as actual ships. 600 of them. The scale was difficult to process. They were large. Each one individually was larger than anything humanity had built in the public eye. Together, they occupied a volume of space that seemed, for a moment, to make the idea of resistance genuinely absurd. I heard someone behind me exhale slowly. I kept my eyes on the screen. Somewhere behind the dark, 4,100 ships were watching the same image on their own screens, and not one of them moved, and not one of them made a sound. At 15 minutes out, my communicator buzzed a final time. No words this time, just a tone, a specific pattern of 3 short pulses, 1 long, 2 short. Admiral Petrosau, inside Titan Station, had just given the order to Admiral Sayoni Tafa to begin final uncloak sequence. I breathed in slowly through my nose. I breathed out through my mouth. The Volkai were 15 minutes from orbit. They had never lost before. They had never been where they were right now, inside a trap so patient, so perfectly constructed, that they had walked into it while completely certain they were the ones in control. I thought about the word arrogance. I thought about how it was not that different from confidence when you had never had a reason to doubt yourself. The Volkai were not foolish. They were experienced. They had done this many times. They had looked at humanity and seen exactly what they expected to see, the same pattern they had seen before on 4 other worlds. Unprepared, disorganized, small. The reason they were wrong was not that they had looked carelessly. The reason they were wrong was that we had shown them exactly what we needed them to see. 15 minutes. The command room was very quiet. The sensor feed showed the Volkai ships spreading slightly as they approached, moving into their arrival formation, the visual arrangement they preferred for entering a new system's inner orbit. They wanted it to look a certain way. Orderly, inevitable. I watched them moving into position, and I thought about what it was going to look like in 14 minutes. What they were going to see, all at once, with no warning and no precedent and no protocol for any of it. I thought about the 31 seconds of silence that our analysts had predicted. Not calculated, predicted, based on everything we knew about how the Volkai command structure responded to unexpected information. The estimate was that the first 31 seconds after Uncloaked would be complete silence on all their channels. Not communication, not orders, not the fast tactical traffic of a fleet responding to a threat. Just silence. Because there was no word in the Volkai language, or at least, no word we had found in decades of intercepted communications, for the thing that was about to happen to them. I was still standing at the main screen in the command room when the timer reached 0. Nothing happened. That is the honest thing to say. At first, nothing happened that we could see from the station. The Volkai ships were there. The space around them looked exactly as it had looked 10 seconds before. The sensor feed showed their formation, their spread, their approach angle. Nora was watching the communication bands. Dale was at the sensor array. Raymond had both hands flat on the edge of the center table, very still. I was watching the clock on the secondary screen. Then the feed changed. It did not change gradually. It changed all at once, the way a room changes when someone throws a switch for the lights. One moment the space around the Volkai formation was empty. The next moment it was not. 4,100 ships appeared in the same instant. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because anything I say will be inadequate. The word appeared does not carry what it needs to carry. The word simultaneous is true but does not give you the weight of it. What I can tell you is what it looked like on the screen. A field of light that had not been there, now was. Surrounding the Volkai formation on every side, above and below, flanking them at every angle, filling the space between them and Earth, filling the space behind them, filling every corridor of the geometric pocket that Gwen Farley had designed. Our ships were not moving. They were simply there, like they had always been there, like the dark had peeled back to reveal something it had been keeping. 4,100 lights. On the sensor feed, the Volkai formation reacted, or more precisely, it did not react. That was the thing. That was the 31 seconds the analysts had predicted. Every Volkai ship stopped. Not changed course, not raised shields, not began the rapid targeting sequence that their combat doctrine called for in a contact scenario. They simply stopped, as if someone had paused the whole formation, as if the collective mind of 600 ships, looking at what was surrounding them, had reached simultaneously for a response and found nothing there. Nora said, very quietly, "Their communication channels have gone silent." I nodded. "All of them," she added. Sergeant Finch made a sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind you make when you have been holding something in for a very long time and a small amount of it escapes. I watched the screen. I watched the Volkai ship sitting still in the middle of a formation that had closed around them like a fist. I watched our fleet, motionless, quiet, simply present in a way that required no explanation. On the side screen I could see the Volkai's external broadcast channel, the one they used for official transmissions, the one that had delivered the ultimatum 4 days ago. It was open but empty, not transmitting. The 31 seconds passed. At 32 seconds, a voice came through on the Volkai tactical channel. Our translation system converted it in real time, the words appearing on the lower band of the main screen. "What is this?" Not a question exactly. 3 words with no tone of inquiry, no upward inflection. Just 3 words trying to process an input that had no prior category. Admiral Sayoni Tafa's voice came across the human fleet channel a moment later. I had heard recordings of him. He had a deep, even voice, the voice of someone who was never in a hurry because he had never needed to be. He had commanded the Titan Station fleet for 6 years. He had trained them, organized them, believed in them through the years when the timetable slipped and the program nearly ended twice, and the sheer difficulty of doing something that had never been done before weighed on everyone. All fleet, this is Admiral Tafa. Hold position. No firing. Maintain formation. Then on the open hailing frequency, the one that the Volkai used, the one that translated cleanly in both directions, he spoke again. Volkai Fleet Command, you broadcast your ultimatum in 900 languages. I am choosing one. My name is Admiral Sayoni Tafa. I am speaking to you on behalf of Earth and all of its people. You are currently surrounded by 4,100 human warships. Every ship in your formation is within targeting range of multiple vessels. You have no path out of this pocket that is not covered. I want to be very clear about what I am telling you. We are not asking you to fight. We are asking you to understand what you are looking at. Silence on the Volkai channel. On the station, nobody moved. I was aware of my own breathing. I was aware of the hum of the ventilation. I was aware of the fact that Owen Clark was standing very still at the edge of the room, and that his face had changed completely from the young, contained, careful expression it had worn for months. He looked like someone watching something he would tell people about for the rest of his life. 3 of the Volkai ships, on the outer edge of the formation, broke position. They moved fast. Volkai vessels were fast, faster than most human ships in a straight line, and these 3 clearly had an exit vector picked out, a gap they thought they had found in the formation. They drove hard toward it. 6 human ships responded. Not aggressively, not with weapons fire. They moved into the path of the 3 Volkai vessels and positioned themselves as obstacles, and then from 2 angles, 2 of our craft fired, short, precise, targeted pulses that struck the drives of all 3 Volkai ships and shut them down without breaching the hull, without causing any structural harm, without doing anything except stopping them exactly where they were. It took 11 seconds. On the Volkai channel, the 3-word statement had been replaced by a great deal of traffic that our translation systems were rendering in fast-moving text across the bottom of my screen. I caught pieces of it. The word impossible appeared in multiple forms. The phrase no sensor contact prior to appeared. There was a question, from what seemed to be a senior officer, about whether this was a fabricated projection, whether the ships were real or some kind of visual deception. Then Admiral Tafa's voice again, calm and unhurried. They are real, all 4,100 of them. Everyone is crewed, everyone is armed. You may take as much time as you need to confirm this. We are not going anywhere. I found that last line remarkable. We are not going anywhere. The quiet certainty of it. The complete absence of aggression because aggression was not needed. It was simply a statement of fact, and the fact was enough. On our station's board, Nora was cycling through the Volkai broadcast frequencies. The external channel, the one that had delivered the ultimatum to every human device on the planet 4 days ago, flickered. Then it activated. The Volkai, intentionally or not, had left their wideband transmission system open. What was happening in the space around Earth was now visible to every receiver in the system that could pick up the Volkai broadcast band, which meant anyone in the surrounding space who was listening. And there were others. We knew there were others. The Volkai did not operate in isolation, and neither did several other civilizations who had been watching human space with varying degrees of interest and wariness for decades, was seeing this. 4,100 human ships, surrounding 600 Volkai vessels. Not a single weapon discharged in offense. The Volkai admiral's voice came through at last. The translation system had a half-second delay, and during that half-second, the command room was completely silent. The translation appeared on the screen. How long have you had this? Not how did you build this? Not how did we not detect you? Not even an expression of anger or demand. How long have you had this? A question that was really something else. A question that contained, inside it, the recognition that the image of humanity the Volkai had been working from was not just incomplete but entirely, fundamentally wrong. Not a recent development, not a sudden change, not humanity scrambling to respond. A question that was beginning to understand that it had been kept outside a room that was much larger and much older than it had suspected. I thought about how to answer that question. Not because it was my answer to give, it was Tafa's, and he would give it properly. But I thought about the answer. 9 years. 9 years of silence and dark and patience and sacrifice. 9 years of families waiting without knowing why. 9 years of engineers who never saw the sun, of pilots who trained in caverns, of a 19-year-old from Lagos who solved an equation in the middle of the night and changed what was possible. 9 years of performing weakness, while quietly preparing something the galaxy had not seen before. How long have you had this? Long enough, I thought. We have had it long enough. The Volkai admiral's name was Keth Salvin. I did not know that then, I learned it later in the documentation that followed. But at the moment I first saw him, over the open hailing channel as Sayoni Tafa opened the visual feed, I simply thought, he is older than I expected. He was tall, angular in the way all Volkai were, with the compound eye structure that made it very difficult to read their expressions in any human sense. But his posture said something. It said it clearly. He was very still, not the stillness of authority, the stillness of someone who has just been told something that does not fit into any existing understanding, and who has not yet decided what to do with it. Tafa appeared on the feed beside Keth Salvin's channel, composed, unhurried, in full uniform. He looked like exactly what he was, someone who had been ready for this moment for a long time and had nothing to prove by it. Admiral Salvin, Tafa said, I am going to make this very simple. He did not list our weapons. He did not describe the formation in detail or explain what would happen if the Volkai attempted another breakout. He did not threaten, and he did not negotiate, and he did not perform strength the way the Volkai performed it, loudly, visually, for effect. He said, you came here to end us. We would like to suggest a different conclusion. I was watching from the station. I had the feed up on my personal screen, and I was sitting very still in the command room, and I was doing something I had not done in front of the crew in months. I was not performing anything. I was just watching. Keth Salvin was quiet for a long time. On his feed I could see the background, a Volkai command bridge, other officers, screens showing data I could not read. I could see the moment when one of his officers leaned in and said something to him, and I could see Salvin's response, which was to hold up a single limb in a gesture that in Volkai body language meant, stop, I will handle this. What is your proposal? Salvin said at last. Tafa glanced off-screen for a moment. I later learned he was checking a prepared document, though he did not look as if he needed it. Your fleet departs this system under its own power, with full crew and equipment intact. In exchange, you carry a message back to your empire. The message is this: humanity has been assessed, and the assessment was incorrect. We ask that a period of non-engagement be formally observed, during which time a delegation from both sides may meet to discuss terms of coexistence. Salvin's posture changed, not dramatically. A slight adjustment in the set of his shoulders, a fractional movement in the angle of his head. But I had spent enough time studying Volkai command footage over 18 months to recognize what it meant. He had expected something else. He had expected, if he was being honest with himself, and I believe he was, in that moment, demands, retribution, some form of reversal that matched the scale of what he had just experienced. He had expected humanity to do what the Volkai would have done, which was to use this position to extract maximum cost. He had not expected an offer that let him leave. "You are not demanding restitution," Solvin said. It came out somewhere between a statement and a question. "We are demanding recognition," Tafa said. "That is all." Another long silence. I thought about the 4 worlds the Volkai had absorbed. I thought about the civilizations that no longer existed in the form they once had. I thought about whether letting this fleet leave was right. It was not a simple thought. I had been carrying it, actually, since I first understood what the plan was, that the goal was not to destroy the Volkai fleet, but to demonstrate, and to give them the opportunity to carry that demonstration home. I understood why. If you reduce an empire's fleet to debris in its first encounter with a new power, you do not end the conflict. You begin a different, longer, more costly one. The Volkai had resources we could not fully map, supply lines we did not control, a home system we had not reached. Destroying the 600 ships in this pocket would make us victorious in this moment and exposed in the next. But showing them what we had, showing them completely, unmistakably, in a way they could not explain away, and then letting them leave to tell the story. That was a different kind of message. It was a message that would travel farther than any weapon could reach. On the Volkai broadcast channel, which was still open, which was still transmitting to every receiver within range, the image was steady. 4,100 human ships in perfect formation, motionless, surrounding 600 vessels that had come here expecting nothing and found everything. I thought about who else was watching. I thought about the other civilizations who had taken notes on the Volkai's expansion and quietly recalibrated their own risk assessments every time a new world fell. I thought about the ones who had looked at humanity and arrived at the same conclusion the Volkai had: small, disorganized, unlikely to last. I thought about what those civilizations were doing right now. Solvin made his decision. "We will carry your message," he said. Tafa nodded once. "Thank you, Admiral." It was the most ordinary exchange. The whole thing, the end of the immediate threat to Earth, the conclusion of 9 years of secrecy and sacrifice and silence, the moment at which the balance of something enormous quietly shifted. It came down to 4 sentences and a nod. I had expected to feel more. I want to be honest about that. I had expected relief, or something like triumph, or the release of a tension that had been building for so long it had become structural, a part of me rather than a state I was in. What I felt was quieter than any of that. I felt the way you feel when you put down something heavy that you have been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. Not the absence of the weight so much as the first clear awareness of how present it had always been. Raymond Cole made a sound at the center table, a single exhale, controlled, like someone who had been holding their breath for a while and had finally decided it was safe to stop. Nora turned from her communications board and looked at me. Her expression was a question. I nodded. She turned back to her board and I watched her shoulders drop. Just slightly, just for a second before she straightened again and went back to monitoring the channels. Owen Clark was standing at the edge of the room, and he was not making any effort to look controlled. He was 23 years old, and he had spent 11 months on a lunar station performing the end of humanity, alongside a commander who had never told him the truth. And now 4,100 human ships were uncloaking in real time on his screen, and his face was doing everything that faces do, when the thing they were afraid of turns out to have been the wrong thing to fear. I walked over to him. He looked at me, he opened his mouth, he closed it, then he said, "You knew." "Yes," I said. "The whole time." "Yes." He stared at me for a moment. Then he looked back at the screen, at the formation, at the scale of what was parting to let the Volkai fleet pass. He shook his head very slightly, not in disbelief, but in something that had no clean name. I left him there and went to my quarters. I sat down at my desk and opened the personal log I had been keeping for 18 months. The fake one, the performed one, the one I had been recording for Volkai Intercept. I closed it. I opened a different file, the one I had been writing to my daughter in the quiet of my quarters late at night, when the performance was over for the day and I was just myself. I had started it the first week of the assignment. I had written it in small pieces, not every day but often. What I saw, what I thought about, what I had given up and why, what I hoped she would understand when she was old enough to read it. It was not a short file. I read the last entry I had made, 3 days before the Volkai ultimatum arrived. I had written about the stars through the porthole, about how strange it was to look at a sky that contained something enormous and secret and not be able to point at it, about how Adiz had sent me a drawing of a rocket, and I had held my communicator against my chest and thought about her voice, which I had not heard in 6 months. I added one more line to the file. Then I opened the transmission system, entered her address, my sister's home in Accra, a location I could picture perfectly even after 18 months away, and I sent it. The whole file, all 18 months of it. It would take time to reach her. It would take more time for her to read it. It would take longer still for her to understand all of it. But the transmission was moving now, at the speed of light, toward a small house in a city on a blue planet that was still turning slowly below me, still blue and white and quiet. I put my hands flat on the desk and sat still for a moment. Outside, the Volkai fleet was leaving. I knew it without looking. Nora would call me if anything changed. They were moving away from Earth, through the corridor in our formation that Tafa had opened for them, back out toward the edge of the system, and whatever journey home looked like from their side of this. As they went, the broadcast channel was still open. The image it was carrying, the one that had been transmitting to every receiver in range for the past several hours, was the image of our fleet parting. 4,100 ships opening a path, not triumphant in the loud way, not arranged for effect, simply present and then receding, and then leaving the space where an invasion had almost happened, looking exactly like space, clear and open and belonging to itself. I thought about who was watching. I thought about what they were learning. I thought about the small adjustments that were happening right now, in offices and command rooms and council chambers across systems I had never visited and would never visit. The quiet recalibration of risk assessments, the careful revision of assumptions, the moment when someone who had considered humanity a manageable presence in the galaxy sat forward slightly and said to whoever was beside them, "We need to revisit this." We had not fired a single shot in offense. We had not destroyed a single ship. We had simply appeared in a number and arrangement that could not be misread, and then we had offered terms that were reasonable, and then we had let the evidence carry itself to wherever it needed to go. I sat at my desk for a long time. Eventually, I picked up my communicator and sent a short message to Admiral Petrosau. It said, "Standing by for reassignment." Her reply came 20 minutes later. It was 3 sentences. "Outstanding, take 2 weeks. Your daughter is waiting." I read it twice. Then I set the communicator down on the desk and looked out through the porthole at the stars. They were still there, quiet, perfectly still. But they felt different now. Not smaller, never smaller. Space does not shrink because you have learned a little more about it. If anything, it felt larger, more detailed, more full of the kind of silence that is not empty but is listening. I thought about Callum Briggs somewhere inside Titan, probably very tired, probably not sleeping yet because the mind does not wind down quickly after 9 years of something. I thought about Gwen Farley and whether she had watched the formation deploy and recognized her own design in it, the way a person recognizes a face. I thought about all the people in the cavern, the ones who had spent years in the dark so that this moment was possible, the ones who had given up the ordinary world without making a sound about it, the ones who had held and held and held until the holding was done. I thought the galaxy just learned something about us. Not that we have ships, not that we have weapons or numbers or tactical formations. Not even that we can keep a secret. The galaxy learned what we are willing to do for each other, what we are willing to give up, how long we are willing to be patient in the service of something that matters. That is the thing that does not translate cleanly into any military assessment. You can count ships. You can map weapons range and calculate formation geometry. You can measure the power output of a phase cloak and assign it a threat tier. What you cannot easily measure is what moves people to spend 9 years in a cavern inside a moon, away from the sun and the faces they love, because the thing they are protecting is worth it. The Volkai would carry the number 4,100. They would carry the formation, the geometry of the pocket, the image of our fleet uncloaking in a single instant. They would carry the voice of Admiral Taffa saying, "We are not demanding restitution, we are demanding recognition." All of that would reach the Empire. All of it would be assessed and analyzed and filed into the revised understanding of what humanity was. But the real thing, the thing underneath all of it, would travel differently. It would travel in the silence of the 31 seconds. In the question Keth Salvin asked, "How long have you had this?" In the way he looked before he answered, in that fractional adjustment of his posture that meant he had expected something and received something else. It would travel as the shape of an unanswered question that the Volkai command would turn over for years. Not how did they build it, not where did the technology come from, not even how did we miss it. The question they would not be able to stop asking was the one that did not have a tactical answer. How do you make a species like that? I looked out at the stars for a long time. Then I got up, walked to the door of my quarters, and went to find Owen Clark. He was in the corridor outside the command room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, thinking. He looked up when he heard me. "You have questions," I said. He almost laughed. "A few. I'll answer what I can, but later there's a transmission I want to help you compose first." I paused. "You have family." "My mother," he said, "and my younger brother." "Then write to them," I said. "Tell them you're all right. Tell them it's over. Tell them you'll explain everything when you're home." He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded, once, the way he had on the observation deck when I told him there was quite a lot on the other side of this. Filing it away, believing it now. "When do we go home?" he asked. I thought about the 2 weeks Petra had given me. I thought about Accra and a house and a girl who had drawn a rocket with my name on the side.